Welcome to the Prana Clinic Talks, where we work on making the shift from a patriarchal, prescriptive perspective of health to one that is intuitive, self-led, and self-compassionate. We discuss all things holistic well-being here, with the hope that you will discover practices, philosophies, and mindset shifts that help you facilitate a joyful and embodied lived experience. I'm your host, Aliana Ramirez, and I truly believe that it's possible for every single one of us to live a life of ease and joy in a body we feel at home in. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Prana Clinic podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm super excited to share with you. This podcast has been a seed sitting in my heart waiting to sprout for quite some time now. And I'm excited to finally be getting into it. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the podcast, a little bit about my experiences and belief system around the healing arts, I guess you could say, and what I'm hoping to accomplish in coming episodes. This is going to be kind of an open-ended platform. I'm going to be playing with it a little bit, but I wanted to offer a space where I could spend a little bit more time sharing on things that I've learned, on things that I feel have helped or could help my clients. Because when I'm in a room one-on-one with somebody, we don't get that much time, right? So any other ways that I can kind of supplement the learning and share more, I think it's always a benefit adds. So that's why I am starting this podcast. Also just to kind of clear my throat chakra, practice opening that up a little bit. So I don't want to jump into my whole life story today, but I do want to talk about how I came to be sitting here recording this podcast right now. I was sitting in meditation earlier today and I noticed some tension in my neck and shoulder. And as I started to pay attention to it, I also noticed a little bit of constriction in my throat. So I asked this part of my body, this pain, this sensation, why it was present and what it needed from me. Now, this is not a practice I do all of the time, this type of formal inquiry around sensation. It is a practice that some people use quite consistently. It's not one that I always use. I tend to lean more towards the open awareness and simple labeling and kind of doing that exploration later on after I've moved out of the meditation. But today, I had started with the body scan in my practice, and it just felt right in the moment to do this sort of formal inquiry. So I asked, and the energy sitting in my neck and throat responded to me immediately, right away. Sometimes when you do this type of practice, you're sitting in quiet for a moment, in stillness, allowing the answer to come. But this answer came immediately, quietly but clearly, that it was asking me to use my voice to speak, that my voice had been blocked for some time and that I needed to start using it. So of course, in the meditation itself, it's a short and simple response. For me, responses when I ask questions, when I'm sitting in meditation, they don't usually come with a big whole explanation like I'm giving right now. It's just a couple of words, right? Or a phrase. And in this moment, it was simply, I need you to use your voice to clear this block, these sensations that were sitting in my throat chakra, essentially, right? Neck, shoulders, throat. And I sat for a moment and kind of acknowledged that response. And then I asked, how? In what way do you want me to use my voice? And it just said podcast. So that was it. It was time to start my podcast. I've learned to try as much as possible to not question that voice and just take it at face value. I've been thinking about this podcast for over a year, and today is the day. Now, listen, as I share this story, I know how cheesy and hokey it may sound for some of you. Some of you may already communicate with yourself and your intuition like this. Others, you may be more like me, you'll discover as I continue to share in this podcast how resistant I have been in my life to some of these more ethereal, metaphysical types of concepts and practices. I've always considered myself an intelligent woman, an educated woman, and in that same vein, a woman of science. I did very well in academia. Academia was a system that I placed a lot of trust in, and I still do in a lot of ways. Even during a lot of my journey in yoga, I've looked to science for confirmation and understanding that the practice and my experiences I was having within it were valid. I have since come to the place where I know the truth and the power of some of these practices that may be considered maybe a little bit more woo-woo, to use the common terminology that people are using these days. And that's actually one of my own blocks, is sharing on some of those more out there findings and experiences and concepts. Because even though through direct experience I know that they are true for me, when you have those direct experiences of a sensation or a set of events or a shift or a cause and effect, belief is very easy, right? But I've still sometimes felt hesitant to share with others anything that didn't have heaps and heaps of peer-reviewed journal articles backing it up. Because I do acknowledge that everyone lives their own experience, and I do want to recognize that my experience may not be the same as yours. And yet what I've found through my own personal exploration and studies and years of inner work and introspection and traditional research and working with clients is that while direct experience and inner exploration is going to, in many cases, get you much closer to the truth, much closer to the root of things, much closer to the source of your suffering than any external scientific conclusions that are based on what is considered statistically significant for an average group of subjects could. Sometimes it is still helpful to speak to someone who has gone there before, someone who can point you in the direction, show you what's available. So we do look to other people's experiences to see what's available. In a way, that's what we do when we look at scientific studies, right? Direct experience and inner exploration is going to, in many cases, get you much closer to the truth than any external scientific conclusions, but not in all cases. And I don't at all want to minimize the incredible advances that science has made in health. But it isn't the end-all be-all that we have held it up to be in the past. And I think many people, including people in the medical community, are starting to come to a place of awareness about that fact. So this podcast is going to talk about both Eastern and Western contributions to human health and well-being, what I've learned through study and in working with clients, as well as a little bit about my own experiences as I continue this healing journey. It's not like I'm done growing and changing and developing my relationship to myself and cultivating a greater sense of thriving and well-being. But the things that have helped me along the way during times when I've been in pain, during times when I've been feeling stuck, hopeless, fragile, disconnected, all of the things that have led me from those places to the times when I feel strong, embodied, grounded, in love with myself, in love with life, hopeful and expansive. There have been many times in my life, especially when I was younger, when I never could have conceptualized ever feeling embodied, grounded, in love with myself, in love with life. And so science has helped me find my way. Traditional therapies and treatments have helped me find my way. But also the holistic metaphysical practices I'll be talking about here have helped me. And I would argue that they've helped me more. But the combination of the two is so beautiful, so unbeatable. And so we'll talk about the intersection and overlap of Western science and medicine and so-called Eastern science and medicine. I plan to share my own direct experience with a lot of these healing practices And hopefully, it will start a really fruitful, healthy, impactful conversation. Perhaps give you permission to think about your relationship with yourself, with the natural world around you in a different way. I'm really excited to go on this journey with you, wherever you might be, and connecting on matters like this that are often so personal and internal, and yet benefit so much from connection and validation and understanding. It is so important for us to become aware of the shared or even universal aspects of some of our experiences. It cuts through the sense of aloneness when we're struggling. It lends us a resource for support, and it helps us hold faith. But what I've seen is that we tend to get off track when we rely solely on the knowledge that's been inputted into our minds and reduce the importance of the wisdom that's sitting in our bodies and our spirits. When we just label that wisdom as secondary information or base animalistic instincts, we are throwing out so much value. There's great, great wisdom in our bodies if we can learn how to quiet the chatter in our minds long enough to hear it. And while that is simple, that doesn't mean that it's easy. We have been very strongly cultured in this society to essentially worship rationality and logic. It takes practice to undo the conditioning that tells us to ignore our body's messages and to revere our mental, cognitive output above all else. And that's not to say that we always need to choose between the two. What we'll often find is that when we hear the messages from our body, when we open up to that line of communication, their body or that deeper sense of self, whatever you want to call it, it's not necessarily in conflict with our thoughts. What it often does is simply clarify and help us focus them, help us identify which thoughts are just fluctuation. Because many of us have minds that are very open to fluctuation. I would argue that almost all of us do. Our minds can make statements that seem so certain, when in reality that they're just the signal coming from some external influence, or we like to say in meditation, it's just the weather. And we need to make sure that we don't mistake weather for the deeper truth and deeper reality. When clouds are covering things, we can think that it's the clouds that are the important information, but it's really what's behind the clouds that we need to become aware of. That's what living from an embodied place can do for us. We've been conditioned in so many millions of ways to ignore our body's wisdom. From very early on, we're told that we need to ignore messages from our bodies about our wants and needs because there is something or someone else that's more important. And there's some necessity to that. As children and as functioning members of a group society, we are social beings who need to live harmoniously in a collective in order to survive. But I would argue that as a society, there is room to give so much more space than we currently do for people to listen to and follow this other type of intelligence that we're not tapping into. And so I really look forward to exploring that with you, because I know that there's magic that happens when we're able to, with discernment, hear the wisdom and information from our bodies, understand the knowledge and wisdom that has been given to us through science, through teachings, through external sources, through exploring our own inner experience, and then integrating all of that information to find the guidance that we need. And as many of us are, I'm a person with varied interests. And so I'm not going to promise that we're going to just be talking about yoga here. As a yoga therapist, I have a strong prediction that this podcast will have a bit of a bias towards yoga and yogic philosophy. But we're going to get into a lot of fun topics. I really, really do care so much about Western science and its discoveries and its knowledge, what we're learning about the human body and the natural world. And yet what I think is most beautiful about what we're seeing in science today is how it's confirming so much of the wisdom and knowledge and understanding that our ancestors have passed down to us from ages ago. There's so much there that we lost, that we're regaining and gaining new respect for. And I'm really excited about the direction that the world of health and wellness and personal development are going in that respect. Of course, there's a lot of work to do, and there's still a lot of pain and suffering, unnecessary pain and suffering in the world. And I hope that through shining a spotlight on these practices, talking about them in what I hope is an accessible way, I can do my very small part to reduce a little bit of that pain and suffering. Because the things that I'm going to talk about here and the teachers that have shared them with me have lifted so much pain and suffering from me. To think that I would be living with this sense of openness and ability to breathe freely, both figuratively and literally, if you had told me that I would be experiencing the world like this back when I was 20, I wouldn't have believed you. So that's why I have so much gratitude for all of these practices, all of this scientific information, all of the things that have helped me transform, essentially, and become the person that I am today. So I really hope to get you as geeked out about these topics as I am. And if you want to join the conversation, or if there are topics that you really hope that I cover as I start this journey, please feel free to leave a comment on the podcast. You can also find me online, connect with me through my website, www.pranaclinic.co. If you're still with me, thank you so much for listening. I would be incredibly humbled if you chose to like this premiere episode, subscribe to the show so you can catch the ones that are on the way. Again, I'm Aliana. Look forward to connecting with you again soon.